Procurement. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
We have one apology from Councillor Lyndon Jones.
Okay. Then item 2 is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Has anybody got any of these? Or any officers as well? No? Right. Item 3 is a prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips. Okay. And item 4 are minutes and responses to the follow-up questions. What I intend to do is go through these for accuracy, and then if there's any questions on them, we'll take it towards the end where we can put in a request to Michelle for any further updates on them. If you see the questions we asked about the place directive, as you can see, there's a number of pages with the replies, and it's quite a substantial reply. So the first one is the first reply is page 2. And then page 3. Page 4. And as you can see, those are the questions. Then we move on to the responses. And you see the first one is the sustainability statement on page 5. Then we have current council projects. So there's a bit more information on that on at the end of 5. Then on page 6, how many local firms do we break up projects to ensure fairness? So you can see the answers there. And how do we check sustainability and risk for the contractors, and do contractors increase credit rating? I think this was really to do with when we had the problems to the Kingsway and one of our firms went bust. And you see there what the replies from the place directive were. And then we have the example of the procurement on the future, and that goes on for some pages, that is. But so what I'm suggesting is that what we do is that we note those replies of the questions we asked, and then we move on, because we got a substantial report here from the Procurement and Social Services Director. Is everybody happy with that? Okay.
Yes, fine.
Right, then we go on to page 28. And I'm not sure, is Dave House going to take this, or is it going to be combined between Chris Williams and excuse me, and Dave House and Chris Williams?
Sorry, Councillor Holly. We've just got the public question to
yes,
look at 27.
Yeah, we have a public question on agenda item 5.
Shall I read that out? And then if I read the question out, just to have it on record. Okay. Somebody came to our blog with this question. They asked, I'm concerned with the lack of provision for housing for learning disabled community. Is the council using the best, most ethical companies for learning disability housing? And then we had a reply from Dave House. I don't know if anyone wants to update on that, or if that's okay. If you're happy to move on from there. I don't know if anyone from the department had anything further to say on that, but.
Dave, do you want to add anything to it? If he's here?
To say, Chair, that's our substantive response to the question.
Okay. Any member want to make comment? Right. Okay. Can we go on to item 6 then? And that's the commissioning of social services in the Directorate. As I say, Mark, do you want to introduce it?
Shall I say a few words, Chair?
Okay, Dave, whoever wants to do it.
I'll just say a quick word or two before Dave takes over. I mean, clearly it's a very large spend in social services, particularly in adult social services. We tend to, rather than contracting, we tend to call it commissioning to do services. We remain the statutory responsibility for most of the services that we do commission, but obviously a substantial proportion of those services are delivered by commissioned in independent organisations. I think there's a very substantial report here, so I guess Dave or Jane will report on that. It is at times a difficult market, for want of a better term, to operate in, because many of the organisations the margins are narrow, and it has been, particularly over the last year, they've required significant not financial support from us, although they've had that from the Welsh Government, support in organisational ways and comms ways, and advice from the authority as well. It's a sort of, it tends to be a different relationship quite often to a normal contractual relationship we might have in other parts of the council, although I haven't the same experience of other parts of the council to justify that statement. But yeah, so we'll happily answer questions after Dave and perhaps Jane said some more.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chair. I need to apologise, first of all, Chair. I've probably got about half an hour this morning, and I'm going to have to go to another meeting. Things are particularly difficult again across health and care at the moment. We would have been joined this morning by Peter Field, as well as Jane Whitmore and Chris Francis. Peter's our lead in adult services commissioning, Chris in children's services commissioning. Jane is a kind of helicopter view person, helping us join things up across what we still think of as a People's Directorate, covering both adults, children, our tackling poverty and prevention work. Jane takes particular lead around commissioning linked to prevention and tackling poverty, third sector, etc., but also helps us to look wider than that across education, where there are synergies, and housing, where there are synergies. So that's why we talk about still adopting a people's approach, even though we don't formally have a People's Directorate anymore. Jane will talk a bit more about the people's commissioning approach we take when she reflects on the paper. Peter would have been with us this morning. It's a good example of something that Mark referenced there. We have huge problems at the moment, particularly around the stability of the domiciliary care market. So real pressures, being able to meet demand through our in-house services, real pressures in terms of meeting demand in the external market as well. And Peter's at an emergency meeting this morning, because what we're experiencing right now is that that fragility, and particularly the external market, is leading to providers having to say to us at very short notice, we need the council to step back in and provide care for these individuals. And when we're already really stretched, that's really difficult for us. So that's a good example of what Mark referenced as is perhaps not the same kind of purely contractual arrangement that we have with organisations. It's much more of a co-productive approach that needs to be taken. That's great, but it does mean that we have to step in and support organisations much more actively than we would, perhaps need to in other sorts of contractual arrangements. And again, Jane will talk a little bit more about that. As Mark has rightly referenced, it's a massive business that we are overseeing and trying to facilitate. When that massive business is under pressure in the way that it is at the moment during the third wave, that's a struggle for us. We hadn't recovered from first and second wave. We've now got third wave. What we're experiencing across Wales is our resources to meet care and support needs, both health and social care, are stretched in ways that we have never experienced historically. That's that's compounded by we're again experiencing issues around workforce being impacted directly by COVID, whether that's through becoming ill or through needing to isolate, etc. That's having a huge strain. But we're also experiencing the repercussions of this extraordinarily difficult 18 months. So staff are exhausted, staff are leaving health and care services. We've got huge competition for that workforce anyway. They're predominantly, you will know, a low-paid workforce that is something that Welsh Government have expressed ambition to do something about that. But at the moment, they are still a low-paid workforce who are who are being sought by all professions at the moment. You'll have heard in the news about the competition for a stretched workforce. Well, our social care services and our healthcare services are in that competitive market, and frankly, at the moment, aren't able to compete very well. So it's the most difficult time we have ever experienced. Some of the conversation that you'll be having this morning will be about how we are managing to maintain as much resilience as we can, but it's under extraordinary pressure at the moment across all of the services that Jane will be talking about in terms of who we're commissioning at the moment. But particularly that personal care at home is at the most stretched I've ever seen it, not just locally, not just in our region, but across Wales. But clearly the council's primary responsibility is how do you meet the care and support needs of those vulnerable individuals, or those individuals with care and support need that you and we are directly responsible for. What's I guess pleasing in really difficult circumstances, that over the last few years we've invested heavily in our resilience, our ability to have a coherent and robust and as strong as possible approach to our commissioning and procurement activity. We've invested strongly in that. Thank goodness we did, because we've drawn upon that resource over and over again during the past 18 months. When we talk and we hear about on the news those frontline staff, well, included within those frontline staff are our commissioning, procurement, contracting officers who have been going to extraordinary lengths to support the market. That's the best way of describing it, and directly support those organisations. I've had numerous contact from, directly from those organisations, thanking our staff, thanking our teams for their efforts. Again, I can give another example. Only a couple of weeks ago, staff at the drop of a hat working the whole weekend, late into the night, because we had late on a Friday night a provider failure, again a domiciliary care provider. So our staff were there sorting out those care calls, finding alternatives, negotiating with other providers, looking at our in-house staff, etc. Just extraordinary efforts. They are our frontline staff as well, and we're expecting them to do that work as well as create, quite rightly, manage all of the legal and procedural and financial rules that Jane will take us through as well. I've probably or hopefully set the scene sufficiently for us to hear a bit more detail on the actual report. I thank officer colleagues who've done the legwork, both Lee Morgan, Jane, Chris and Peter, who isn't with us this morning, who work very closely together to make sure we have a coherent approach that meets our responsibilities, both for commissioning, procurement, contracting, monitoring, etc. We are bound to have, because of those pressures over the last 18 months, we have bound to have had to, at times, make pragmatic decisions about what we have to concentrate on, and at times that has been, well, we've had to seek dispensation from various rules, whether just to keep the things afloat. That doesn't mean that those rules and our ordinary business isn't robust. You'll see from the report that there's still work for us to do, but I suppose I just want to finish by putting on record my thanks to those those staff who have been managing during this extraordinarily difficult time. Usually I'm talking about other frontline staff delivering direct services, but this group of individuals working for the council who wouldn't aren't necessarily usually the people we pick out and say they are absolutely crucial to the delivery of health and care, and just keep helping us survive the pandemic as best we can, helping us make sure we can keep our residents safe and well. But they have been absolute heroes as well throughout, and have continued to have to do that as we as we're meeting today. It's enough from me on my soapbox, Chair. I will hand over to Jane, who'll give us a bit more of a summary of the detail.
Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, Jane.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Chair. Okay, if I'll just pick out some highlights through the report, and John, if there's any questions as I go through, if you want to stop me, and I know that Chris and Lee are here as well to add in, if that's okay. So as Dave's mentioned, in terms of the report, it starts off with some sort of background and context about how we've organised ourselves as commissioning teams across the Directorate to look at that sort of single view of the customer and of people. And as I said, we're no longer a people directorate, but actually procurement and commissioning in social services is for people. It's very different from or buying goods. It's buying services, for people who are, which is really important. So we've worked in this way. We started developing it back in 2018, so that we've created a sort of a virtual commissioning hub that brings all of our commissioning and contracting roles within the different teams across the Directorate together to make sure that we can build capacity across all elements of that commissioning cycle, by analysing what does the market look like, what does the current situation need to do, planning around how we would meet that need, and thinking about how we could do it in different ways, and then actually doing it, which could involve commissioning, procuring services, and then actually that reviewing and that constant review and transformation as we move through things. We are under obviously the council's contract procurement rules. We work within those guidelines. They came into effect in 2019, but there are exemptions for social care contracts. Because of the complexities of social care procurement, which is in terms of court directives, in terms of things that we would just have to do to keep people safe, and we are told to do them. So there are exemptions in place, which is slightly different from others. Also, as well, we've got the public contract regulations that changed in 2015, which was a real driver for change in terms of social care as we moved forward, because it turned us out into looking at things in a very different way in terms of light touch regimes as described in those regulations. And that brought into force the close working with the category manager from the procurement team in terms of adults, children's and prevention and education services, and those services in housing that actually touch on delivering for people, and actually how we work together across that people commissioning sort of landscape, which covers many directorates. We did have sort of that impact specifically on those procurement arrangements in social care, as historically it was embedded in that relationship contracting with external providers, which then was non-compliant. So there's been a huge amount of work since 2016, 2017 in terms of actually making sure we are compliant. And there was a audit report back in 2017 around that resources should be continued to allocate in to ensure that social care contracts are compliant with the council's contract procedure rules and the public contract regulations. So we have done a huge amount of work around that. As Dave and Mark has said, we do have a huge amount of contracts. There's around 133. This was at a point in time. I think there's probably more at the moment. And in terms of that 66 million spend, where actually there's probably another 25 million on top that goes through the Abacus systems rather than Oracle around residential and nursing care. So there's a huge amount of money that goes across the Directorate, and that is contracted in many different ways. We're also very close working with the National Commissioning Board around Social Care Wales, and they produce some guidance around procurement of services in social care, with that drive and the need to ensure that procurement practice supports the delivery of services in terms of people services and social care services, rather than the other way around, because it sort of recognises there is a difference. That was published in 2019, but it's been that approach that we've been working towards, over the last couple of years. But of course, the impact of COVID, as Dave has said, has been significant in terms of the social care services. And it's made the relationship with our providers even more important in terms of what we do on a daily basis. It's not just doing the reports, making sure it's legal, making sure it's about talking to our providers and actually working with them so that we can continue to operate and provide services for people. So we were given the procurement policy notice that came from Welsh Government in July 2020, enabled us to have some flexibility so that we could continue to work in that way, so that we're reviewing the contract portfolio and providing relief to those who have been impacted directly by COVID, so that we maintain the services of critical services in terms of the pandemic. That's very much still going on in the third wave as we go on. The other bit that they've asked us to do was that working in partnership again with our providers and developing those transition plans and exit as soon from any relief. So there has been a COVID relief fund, and it's been significantly utilised through from Swansea in terms of social care. But there's a piece of legislation guidance that's just come into about in September now to look at those exit strategies as we taper down support. But again, it's a very much of a moving beast as we move through things and things change so quickly. So we've talked about the dom care market this morning. So actually we looked through those things and said, what do we do to maintain that we pay providers as quickly as possible, maintain the cash flow and protect the jobs, so that we keep that really scarce workforce that's out there in work, and actually supporting them to do as much as we did. So we took that approach back in July in terms of the legislation that came in. We also can come up with some high level principles about working through reviewing our contractor arrangements, looking at the contracts. Don't just look and revert back to business as usual. If there's been some really good innovation and different things that we've done over the COVID period and that we are still managing to do, is actually just look at them and think about how we can commission in a different way and a different approach going forward. And again, that collaborative approach with our market providers, and that move towards an outcome focus on commissioning as we get back to some kind of normality, which is really difficult, and it's been really significant over the last 18 months, and still appears in a forefront of our minds as we move forward. So the next section is really a bit of a sort of an overview, and that poses the questions that you asked of us in terms of the inquiry about the overview of the procurement activities in the Directorate. So as what we've talked about is our procurement people commissioning approach, and we do have a work plan that we maintain of all of the contracts and all of the procurement activities that are ongoing at the moment, so we can understand where we are and manage risk, ensure compliance. So we don't want to do something in one area that's going to destabilise another area. So actually to making sure that we do take up that joint up approach, looking at where there's capacity issues and actually where we can gain efficiencies as possible. And as it says, there's the 133 different kinds of contracts or frameworks or service level agreements that's necessary in order for us to manage business. We've contracts when we contract with external providers, and third sector providers, private providers. There's contract frameworks in place, but there's service level agreements that are also in place when we contract with health boards, for example, or our schools, for example, because they come under the same legislation as us as a council. And that's the significant difference between there. In terms of the value, and there's a little table there under 3.5 that gives us a number of contract providers, the number of that we have in place, and the values that looks like. Now, this was done a couple of months ago, and I know I think I'm going to bring Chris Francis in here, because I know that the children's service area is incorrect at this point, and there is a different pressures on there. Chris, do you want to say something?
Yeah, just to say that obviously that table is, as Jane has alluded to, it's pulled together as a snapshot in time. And earlier this year we've been retendering our contracts for some of our looked after children accommodation services. So it's quite a large, high cost service and important service area. And so that table is currently missing information on the value of some of those contracts around independent fostering. So just to give you an indication, there's probably about a further 5 to 6 million missing off the table. Absolutely. In terms of children's services.
Thanks, Chris. And actually there's probably more that's missing in terms of, as we move forward, in terms of how we support the sector to recover with different money. So as you say, it's a snapshot in time, but it gives you a broad sort of overview of how it's broken down. As you say, adult services is the biggest area that we procure services from, but it does impact on across all of those areas. 3.6 outlines the different kinds of services that we procure, which is very much, as you can see, they are services for people, and they are quite broad ranging. They range from those that we have to do in terms of our statutory requirement, in terms of then right the way through to our early intervention and prevention, and our third sector services, all the way through the age range. So it's quite varied in terms of the activity that we procure, and all of the activity is supported again by our qualified category manager and a procurement officer in terms of supporting our commissioning approach to make sure that we're doing things properly. So this next question you asked us was how across the Directorate, how do we ensure that there's a consistency of approach and of alignment with the Council's strategies and objectives. So again, we talk about our people commissioning group and how we align then in terms of bringing in adult services, children's services, prevention services, education and housing, to make sure that we can have that consistent approach for the residents of Swansea, and where we can join up some resources and grant funding opportunities where possible. The revenue funding sources are built into the Council's annual budgets, and that's approved and obviously under each service area, and any variances are reported through PF&M as normal, and the additional FPR reports. Grant funding resources have their own approval process, which is slightly different, because on top of we're talking about revenue funding, there is a significant amount of grant funding that goes into this area. And again, those grant funding terms and conditions are included in the invitation to tender packs, and supported that when they go out to sell to Wales, that they know that that's actually the different funding streams that they're talking about. We also look through the implementing the commissioning process. We look at FPRs and CPRs. We look at the Social Service and Wellbeing Act, the public contract regulations, wellbeing of future gens, equality, and other sort of regional drivers, including social value and community benefits, which is obviously where it all links in, and they're all included in the tender packs as well. The other question that you asked in terms of was the responsibility, and how do we, in terms of the separation of duties, to make sure that we're ordering and receiving goods and services, and how all of that works. So we included a little process map that we use across the Directorate in terms of who does what and when and at what point in terms of the value, so that we're complying with the Council's spending limits as examples as they go on, and how we procure and how it all goes through, and the approval limits in terms of contract purchase agreements and oracles going through. But there are different arrangements in social services, which is administered via the SCIF team, which is done on the Abacus system, which is slightly different, but actually that they are administered by the same set of staff working on commissioning and go through the same sign off in terms of going forward. We look at how do we procure cost effectively and transparently. Again, we look at how we do the market research to make sure that contracts and some benchmarking, are they around the same? What does it look like under the European Directorate for social care contracts? And we publish them obviously on Sell to Wales. It involves that open competition and price on quality, and was when we publish those tender contracts. So that is done. That is done, and it's in the public domain. We share obviously all of the outcomes of the tenders and the decisions. They're notified as well through the portal, and they're shared across with all officers. That would be the same across the whole directorate. Then we ask about the question around the alignments with the Future Generations Act, or the Wellbeing Future Generations Act, in terms of those focus on prevention. There's much similarities between the Social Service and Wellbeing Act and the Future Generations of Wales Act in terms of looking at prevention and early intervention, co-production, voice, choice and control, and actually those are built into our tenders when we put them out on Sell to Wales and eTender Wales. We utilise the sort of public notifications to say what's coming up. We talk to our sectors, our private sectors and our third sectors, and those good relationships with them so that they know what is available. But we don't discriminate against about local suppliers in contracts. However, sometimes on evaluation we will ask for local suppliers because it's important that they do have local knowledge, and that's something that we encourage through the council and through the contracting arrangements. We also have the standard terms and conditions that look at social value and community benefits, modern slavery, Welsh language, equal opportunities and safeguarding. They're embedded in the selection questionnaire, which covers all references for them. So if somebody failed one of those, that we wouldn't be operating a contract or arrangement with them. On occasions then we do the Meet the Buyer events, so that encourages local engagement from providers on main contracts so that they understand and how we can support market development. We done one back in June for the provision of temporary accommodation for young people, as Chris talked about earlier. You ask us then questions on around our Quality Act. Again, it's very much similar to the question before. Those are included in the standard questionnaire in terms of equality, to make sure that we're making sure that all of the public sector quality duties are met. And obviously when we're doing procurement activities, that we go through the IIA process for screening and a full report to understand outcomes if needed. The question around staff training on procurement and tendering process is that we have myself and Lee as jointly done commissioning and procurement training together for teams across the directorate, sort of to understand what's the similarities and difference between commissioning and procurement, and that covers the sort of the procurement legislation, the design and the tender process, developing specifications, the different types of award procedures, advertising, evaluating, scoring and feedback. We did another course with legal colleagues as well around 2P, around staff, if they are liable for the 2P in or out, and what does that look like and how we move that. So we have those ongoing support again through our social care category manager in procurement, and the staff net guidance is available to officers in terms of how we write guidance on specification. We share practice on a good method statement question and what we could, so we have some kind of consistent process. The joint procurement activities, again, it's very much sort of driven through our people arrangements around commissioning, around what do we do and how we can do it together. So we've got some joint activities going on at the moment in terms of adult services and children's services for young persons and housing and homelessness, and what that looks like. We've got that's all coordinated again by commissioning teams and reps and feeding into the people commissioning group. Regionally, we also work regionally across commissioning and the partnership arrangements around the West Glam. So an example there would be the West Glamorgan transforming complex care arrangements, which then would look at and address any joint procurement implications and activities that might come into place there. And again, our category managers, it represents us on the procurement national commissioning board, which enables a national viewpoint. The monitoring of the procurement activity is primarily done through the People Commissioning Group, so we escalate things that we are concerned about, but it is a key part of obviously the specifications in which they describe the performance requirements and the monitoring. We have contract monitoring arrangements which do differ across services. There's a blend of a submission of analysis of service user feedback, stakeholder feedback and financial reporting, as well as the outcomes that we're looking from the service users, and that comes into a part of when we're reviewing through the commissioning cycle. What is externally audited for that procurement activity? Again, we are under the normal audit procedure for the council, but we do have external audit requirements in terms of the large grants, mainly the Housing Support Grant and the Children and Communities Grant, and that's carried out by Welsh Government, and there's a requirement of the grant terms and conditions, and it's carried out by the Welsh Audit Office. Both of the last audit occurred prior to the pandemic, and both were approved with only minor recommendations, and we have an ongoing agenda in-house audit of the social care procurement activity that will commence probably towards the end of this year. The effects of leaving the EU on our procurement activities is something that we've been talking about. In fact, if you don't mind, if I can pause for a second, and if I could ask Lee to take this one for me, is that okay, Lee?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
For us, as Jamie was saying, in terms of Brexit and has led to supply issues, knock-on effect with the effects of COVID as well, and supply issues, and currently the shortage of HGV drivers, etc. We are experiencing some issues in terms of some supplies with our joint equipment store, with longer leads in times, especially for some key equipment, which is affecting potentially discharge from hospital, etc. But there is a national viewpoint on this, led by the NHS supply chain in Wales, and we're looking to use our collective buying power to see how we can address this issue. But as Jane said, as 13.2 in the paper, the rebalancing care white paper that came out from Welsh Government was published not so long ago. That is looking at to take a potential centralised approach to commissioning and procurement, and that could have a bigger effect on our local commission arrangements than the effects that we've seen so far on the exiting of the European Union. I think, as mentioned later on in the paper, some of the things that we need to look out with is the forward look in terms of procurement reform and the changes in legislation, and how that could potentially dramatically affect social care and health procurement.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It comes on in terms of our recommendations at the end, because that is a risk that it's very, very real, and thinking about what that looks like as we go forward. So the last questions was, I think you asked us, was the improvements to the council's procurement practice. And again, we have really developed robust and detailed contract procedure rules for the contract for procurement activities. However, as you say, working together for integration and improvement and learning lessons is always is always important as we go forward. The commissioning teams, I think we become are in the Directorate. They weren't created or resourced to procure in the way that's currently required, and I think we've seen that especially over the last 18 months, that we are looking at. There's different legislations, there's different procedures coming in, and on almost there is different things that we need to think about, so that continued regular training around procurement and 2P, and combined with that greater experience of procurement is really important, and the timeliness on the team's capacity to complete the commissioning process to undertake a procurement activity, as Dave said right at the beginning, is really difficult. So sometimes that we have to make really quick decisions in terms of getting support to people to meet our obligations, rather than actually taking the time to actually go through a full commissioning cycle, which is a difficulty as we go through, and a pressure, as you say. So looking at our commissioning processes and how we can, how can they get disrupted to address immediate operational pressure. So how do we improve that process to sort of lead to a timelier re-procurement process, and what does that look like in terms of our improvements of going forward? Developing a better understanding of social value and adapting procurement practices to promote our social value under our obligation of Section 16 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. And I think there's a big piece of work across the council around understanding social value. But I know that we've been working with across the region and talking about about what social value means in social care contracts, because almost by default they add social value because of the nature and type of contract they are. But how do we actually make sure that we sort of draw that out, and what do we need to do about that as we look going forward? Designing those contract specifications which have got that outcomes focus on people, so we're doing what matters to people and providing services that they want and need, and actually their outcomes are good, and actually making sure that we're maximising those opportunities to involve service users, citizens in the procurement process to lead to more collaborative and co-produced services. We've got some really good examples of when we have done that in the past. So in terms of sort of a summary of where we are, it looks like, looking like we need to be seeking to develop that integrated approach that builds and shares expertise between commissioners, procurement and contract managers, so that we continue to build on the sort of the good practice and the good work that we've done so far. That would help us to progress transformation at pace, but not only locally, but also on a regional footprint, and to enable us to make changes to drive forward those modern outcome-based collaborative processes that would benefit for Swansea residents. As well as looking at how do we recover from COVID, when do we get to a recovery from COVID, and all of those things as we move forward. It's been a very busy time. In terms of the impact on the UK Green Paper on procurement reform, that is also currently unknown, as Lee talked about at the beginning. And thinking about what does that look like and what does that mean in terms of the Green Paper if they remove the light touch regime in the new rules, because that could have a huge impact on the arrangements of social care contracts. So if that was the case, we'd have to look at commissioning and procurement teams to make sure that because they would be under-resourced to deal with that change as it goes forward. So that is unknown, but it is a risk that we're dealing with and trying to work through it as we move forward. And I think I've come to the end of the report, so I will pause there for any questions, if that's okay.
Can I, Jane, thank you very, very much for a very comprehensive report. And you must be exhausted, so if I suggest you have a glass of water or milk or whatever, and then I'll go around and ask questions of members. I have Councillor Peter Jones and Councillor Jeff Jones has got their hands up. So I think Peter's first. For Peter, Councillor Peter Jones.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. First of all, thank you to Social Services colleagues for very informative and instructive information about procurement within the Directorate, and thank you very much. I've got a very specific question, and it's in relation, dare I say, to Brexit and the impact of Brexit on procurement and supply within the department. We're told that it's undoubtedly led to issues, quote, with supplies and increased costs. Is it possible, maybe not this morning, you may need to provide a written response, is it possible to give some indication, excuse me, of the proportion of procurement supply that is imported from EU member countries, and what is happening in terms of the supply arrangements between those countries and ourselves? I accept the point about lorries and so forth, we're all aware of that, but it's the supply issues I'm particularly interested in. And then in relation to that, are these difficulties likely to continue, or can they be resolved? The latter, i.e. if they cannot be resolved, are there alternative UK supply sources that we are investigating? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Jen, do you want to answer this, or do you want...
We will go away and do a written response, but I might bring Lee and Chris in just to help me with this one, because I don't think it is a huge issue in social care procurement, but I think we will go away and do a proper response in terms of the proportionate, but unless one of my colleagues tells me otherwise, I don't think in terms of the community equipment store there would be issues there, so there will be a response, Peter, for that. Lee, do you...
Yeah, I think that's the predominant use, and I think what we'd have to do is refer that, if we take the question away, because we'd have to speak to NHS colleagues, because they run the agreement on behalf of us as a collective for all of Wales, and also potentially the PPE requirements, which probably may have been addressed in the Police Directorate, is also NHS service as well, and also through Welsh Government. I'd say there is a proportion probably from the European market, but to give a definitive answer, I think it's best to check with colleagues in the NHS if that's okay.
Okay.
May I just
say from? Oh, sorry.
Well, sorry. I was just going to mention the council has set up an internal working group to look at this issue, so I can provide a summary of where we are with that. But as you heard, I think in the Police Directorate's response, construction materials has been a problem, and we've seen price increases there. But yeah, if it's okay, we'll come back with a written response based on the complete understanding.
Okay, I got Councillor Jeff Johnson and Councillor Mark Charles. So Jeff Jones first.
Sorry, can I just add to the response to Peter?
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff. Yeah, I think as far as Brexit goes, the main area of concern to me would be the supply of staff within particularly res care, but some dom care and other areas as well. I mean, I can't quantify it, but I know from personal experience that a number of staff of European nationals have left the UK since Brexit or around Brexit, and staffing is one of the areas of greatest difficulty in sustaining services at the moment. So whilst I can't say the quantifiable effect, I can only say that it has been negative.
Okay, thank you. Jeff Jones, Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks for that. James, thanks for relaying that. You put me in the dark with relaying something. With regards to, somebody's got their microphone on somewhere, I think. Peter, you got your microphone on? Peter Jones? No?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think from what you've actually relayed, Jane, it seems to be shall we say, a work in progress. We're moving down the road. You mentioned that we are, shall we say, compliant in certain parts, but not in others. How far down the road are we with regard to compliance for commissioning and procurement? There's also a figure of, well, you mentioned a figure of 4 people somewhere further back. What exactly are those people? Are they procurement people or whatever? And the figure of 133 contracts, are they all compliant, or are we still, work in progress with regards to getting them compliant at the end of the day? I understand the pressures you've been under must be horrendous, and social services, but then again, other areas have been as well. So how far down the road are we at the present time?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, no, it is a very positive picture. So in terms of compliance, I would imagine, I think we're around 95% compliance at the moment. So when we had our first audit back in 2017, there was a significant issue in terms of compliance. However, at this moment in time, it is much more. And when we say we're non-compliant, it means that we have utilised the waiver and dispensation process to actually procure quickly and at pace, because we've had to. So whilst it might not have come right the way through the proper process and going out to market, that it has been made compliant by utilising a waiver process in terms of those compliance. So it's around 94%. So of those 133, that probably, I think it equates to, I'm trying to remember what's on the work plan, I think it's around 8 contracts which have got to be looked at this moment in time. I'm going to bring Lee in because I think he'll suggest that I'm either miles away, I'm pretty close, or to actually give some detail. And they are mainly in adult services. And they are sort of long-term contracts in terms of they're non-compliant because of the value of them has gone over the EU threshold because they've been running for such a long time. So that's where the non-compliance element of it runs, rather than in terms of the service provision. The provision is good and the quality is good and it's safe. So which is obviously our main concern. Lee, am I correct, or have I missed something?
Yeah. There is a small number of contracts, but some of these have got quite a substantial value. But some of the contracts we're talking about here are extra care facilities, housing support grant contracts, etc. They're quite complex contracts that need time to review, and obviously with COVID, etc. and the fourth commission review, it's all intertwined in that, and it needs to have a formal review process to enable the correct commission decision to be made before a decision can be made. And I think, as James was saying, we are quite a long way from where we were from that previous audit report. And I think even during COVID, a number of contracts were still able to be awarded during it, including supported living, for example, that was awarded during the pandemic. So we are nearly there, but again, it's always a moving feast of social services. Something new will come and we have to action it straight away, and that will inevitably potentially lead to non-compliance. But we'll support social services colleagues from the procurement side as best we can to identify the risk and just ensure people are aware of what risks are there potentially.
Okay, thanks for that. Sorry, Chair, can I just ask a clarification? You know, these waivers, you know, that is, shall we say, giving us leeway anyway, you know, in difficult times. How long is the waiver actually lasting for? And, you know, is it a waiver for a year, or is it a contract waiver for 2 or 3 years or whatever? And, you know, hopefully we'll be in a position when the waiver comes to an end to actually go through the proper processes.
So, Councillor, I can. So ideally, we'd like to say no more than a year in terms of it's an emergency. We have to do it. However, there are occasions where we know there's significant work that needs to be done. So we'll go, well, actually, it's going to take us two years. So it's in terms of us understanding how long it will take to do the work and how we manage the risk in the meantime. But ideally, you would say within a year, you wouldn't want waivers going on, and reoccurring waivers. I know that there's something Chris Williams will tell me off about how we don't have reoccurring waivers and how we actually make sure that we are saying, no, it's going to take us 2 years to do this piece of work, to actually analyse, understand what the needs are. Of course, it has been significantly impacted by COVID, because what the needs were. So in terms of work, so if we were talking about older people's residential care, what they were pre-COVID to what they are now is completely different. So that's the added complexity about it. But that's what we try to do, is to make sure that they don't reoccur for going on and on and on. We know about them, we manage the risk, and we understand and we have a plan around what we do with them. I don't know, Chris, have I explained that correctly in terms of a waiver process?
Yeah, I think in the context of everything we've discussed, the massive hit of the pandemic and the draw on people's time. I mean, as James said, so from about 2016 onwards, a huge amount of progress has been made, running through tens of millions of pounds of contracts. However, there is a residual body of contracts to be finished. We have visibility of those, but it's fundamentally a job of work to be done, not helped by the current climate and what we've just experienced, but acknowledging it is there. And as James said, the process that's being described is effectively what we call a direct award. To a company which will have been assured that it can provide the right service, it has the right quality thresholds. But what we are looking to do is then at the appropriate moment take that out to the wider market. It's part of that ensuring supplier sustainability, refreshing those contracts, looking for does the contract meet the needs of the time. Now we have, again, without overcomplicating, we have the ability to change contracts during their term, as Jane described earlier in her report, but also periodically we want to go out again to refresh our arrangement, to look, does it meet the needs of citizens, to back to those outcomes, have they changed what we want? And that's the process that Jane's describing. And also it's a cycle, whether it's 3, 5 years or whatever, these things need periodic refresh. And it's having the visibility of that and putting the time and effort into do it, which we want. And we are very positive about the collaborative arrangement we have, in looking at this and getting this done. But yeah, there remains to be some residual contracts where that's to be applied. Hope that answers it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, Councillor, sorry, they are monitored as well. So we constantly monitor them through the normal monitoring arrangements. We don't just leave them there just because they are. So although they might not be, they may be. There's the contract monitoring process that's still going on as well for assurance.
Okay, thank you. I got Councillor Mike White, then Councillor Phil Downing. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane, and thank you for your report. Excellent. Just 2 points. Jane, do you feel like the awarding contract to the lowest bidder causes the most risk to provide the service? And secondly, do you have systems in place to remove contractors off the procurement list for underperforming? If so, how long is the process to remove them off the list? Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chair. Okay, so in terms of when we award, that we don't necessarily award to the lowest bidder because of the nature of the contracts that we provide. They are contracts for people in terms of care and social care and prevention activities for, you know, for services for people. When we set the specifications, when we go out to market, we look at the price of the service and we look at the quality of the service, and we assign a price quality split. So for example, if you were buying pens, I'll give this as an example, you'd want to just get the cheapest pens. As long as they're a reasonable quality, the price would probably would take more of an importance than the quality of the pen, even though you could argue otherwise. So when we do services, we look at 70% of the contract award being on quality of service, so that we're making sure that they're applying with all of those equal opportunities safeguarding arrangements, that they're registered in the proper way in terms of CIW. They've got good policies in place, and the quality of services is important, and they're delivering what matters for people. And then 30% of that would be then scored on price. Sometimes we go 60-40 to make sure that we get a good value of price, so that we are that competitive sort of area. We never go 50-50 because that would be it's almost pointless, isn't it? Because you can't judge by the way. But so normally we take a standard view of 70-30, so that we would never just award on the lowest bidder. We award on the best quality. So that's an approach we take across the whole of the Directorate for all of our contracts. And in terms of your other question, Mike, around monitoring and compliance, so therefore we're built in within the contract specifications that go out. So when we award, we have an contract inception meeting that talks to the provider in terms of managing expectations between both parties of what that looks like in terms of the delivery and how that would be monitored. And that's probably monitored on a quarterly basis. It does depend on the type of contract. Some of them are monthly. Some of them, I think in Chris's area, would probably be daily, because of the importance of obviously placing children in, and placements for them. But if there is an issue, it's built into the contract. There are clauses in there in terms of ceasing the contract, which is supported by a procurement. But it's done through monitoring and through talking. You talk about it. You talk it through in terms of those monitoring meetings. If it's significant and it's got to stop there and then. And there's clauses in there that gives us the ability to do that. But if there is action that needs to improvement, we would do a monitoring meeting, issue an action plan, say we want to see improvement within 3 months. The action plan would come back in. Oh yes, they've addressed this. This is working well. This is what people are telling us, and we can continue with the contract. There might be tweaks that are going on. So it's very much about those conversations and talking it through, unless it is significantly enough to say, oh my goodness, we shouldn't be, this is not safe, and then we would utilise our contract standard terms and conditions to terminate. And the termination can be immediately, Lee and Chris, I think, but they can be, but normally it would be normally around 3 months, I think, is it? But there is an immediate clause in there. Is that right?
Yeah. So just from what Jamie's saying, there's in our terms and conditions, we've embedded that as standard. So every social services contract that goes out, and I can share the standard social care terms and conditions with members after, there's an inbuilt what's called service improvement plan. So in the event of something is performance is substandard or not up to scratch, etc., there's a clear process to follow for that within the terms and conditions. And as Jane was saying, in the event that potentially it needs immediate termination, we've got clear clauses for immediate termination. And then if not, then there's plans to terminate if we need to mutually terminate. Again, that's covered then in the standard terms and conditions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Phil Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. For example, if we procure a service and it's a very large one, and then for no sudden reason they pull out, could be for anything, which leaves us with a very big headache, because we cannot fill this gap. Do we find then that others are coming in and the price has suddenly gone up because they know our situation and they know we are desperate to fill this hole? And the same thing with the follow on from Mike. If this happens to somebody who's providing a service, and we say we're going to terminate, we've got to have something in place. Otherwise, we could be taken on for not supplying a service. Thanks, Chair.
Okay.
I'm so pleased that Chris has put his hand up to answer that
Chris.
one, because it does happen. You are right. So yeah.
Yeah, that certainly happens occasionally in children's services. There is a national crisis in care at the present time, so we periodically find ourselves in a position where we've looked to find a placement for a child, and we've tendered for a placement for a child, and maybe we've had an offer and we're planning to move that child into that particular placement, and then we get informed that that isn't a possibility. So that can happen, and sometimes it can be very difficult to try and fill that gap, and also very disruptive for the child or young person whose plans now have to change at often quite short notice. So that does happen, and it does cause considerable challenges. There's some of the kind of operational challenges, I suppose, that Dave and Jane were alluding to earlier on in the meeting, whereby you're called to kind of drop everything and try and respond to this, this immediate situation, and trying to find a service that's able to support that individual.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I see you've got your hand up. Councillor Mark Charles.
Yeah, just to add to Chris's response there. I just wanted to reassure that our number one concern in any of these circumstances is safeguarding. So we will do all that is necessary to make sure the individuals who were receiving the service either continue to receive the service from us or somebody else, or in other ways we ensure that they are safe. And that safeguarding, as Jane was saying, is 70% is the quality of the provision and 30% is the cost. Safeguarding is 100% of our consideration. So, and we have had, and we are having contractors pull out of markets, and certainly in dom care we've had it recently, or maybe they pulled out sections and said we can't deliver that much care, we can only deliver so much care. So we're having to find other people, either we pick it up ourselves or we find other people in the market who will pick it up. Sometimes what happens is if a contractor pulls out of a market, the staff will hopefully, this is what we try and negotiate, move to another supplier and carry on doing the same provision of care, only under a different employer, and so we sustain the care that way. But it's always a struggle. It's a juggling act. And I'll second what Dave said earlier about how extraordinarily difficult it has been when you get multiples of these things happening at the same time, which is the current situation in social care. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other members like to pass comment? No? Any other cabinet member? Louise or anyone say anything?
Not really from me. I just obviously thank you to the officers, and I just wanted to pick up as Jane already has. There were some questions in that you asked there about equalities and wellbeing of Future Generations Act and that kind of thing. I just wanted to stress the work on co-production that's going on, which really embodies those principles, as Jane's already highlighted. So that's all from me. Thank you to the officers.
Okay, thank you. I have a few comments and questions as well. Mark, did you got your hand up? Mark, you moved it.
Sorry, Chair. I thought we'd come to the end. I just wanted to say that I think it was Councillor Jones, where somebody mentioned that we're sort of coming towards the end of COVID, or it felt like we were. In social services, COVID is not over, we are anything like a long way from the end. In fact, in many respects, we are currently going through the most difficult time caused by COVID throughout it all. I mean, obviously, we're luckily, we're not having so many people pass away and die, but in many other respects, the ability to sustain services is as difficult, if not more difficult now due to COVID than it has been throughout the last 18 months or however long it's been. So I just
Jeff,
pray.
you got your hand. Councillor Jeff Jones has got his hand up.
Yes, sorry, there was one thing actually. It's near the end of the report. You know, we're actually talking about removal of, you know, the light touch regime and so on. You know, there are going to be changes after we come out of Europe going to affect procurement, and procurement is an extremely important part of any organisation. But it actually says in 15.3. If this is the case, both commissioning and procurement teams, which are currently under-resourced, you know, I know people are actually, well, staff must be stressed out with the work and so on. You know, is there anything going to be done with regards to tackling this under-resourced issue?
So do you want me to come back on that one? So yeah, you're absolutely right. So if there was a significant change to that, Councillor Jones, it would be an issue that we would have to deal with. So in terms of our commissioning teams, we've organised ourselves, but there is we are looking at additional resources going in from the Social Care Recovery Fund that we are looking to get. Hopefully we get in, but as Councillor Child mentioned, it's not the money that's the issue, which is, I can't believe I'm saying this, it's the funding is available. It's the actual capacity in the system, not just of with those specialists and those areas of expertise. So we talk about the front line and we know that there's a pressure on there, but it's in terms of our commissioning and procurement sort of joint arrangements and how we you know, who's got that expert, because actually the expertise of commissioning services for people is slightly different to those of the big construction contracts that you heard around with place, and of course they would be. I wouldn't want to start commissioning buildings like that, but so I think there's funding there. It's what does that look like and what does that need, and I think we're just waiting at the moment in terms of what does that actually mean and what does that look like in terms of how we then would reorganise ourselves to address that going forward. So yeah, we are very much aware of it, and there would be, it's just what does that look like, I think. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Jeff, Chris Williams.
As similar to Jane's point, yeah, that change in legislation is yet to be clarified exactly what would happen. Potentially it would mean a lot more work, is the crux of it, a lot more central reporting, a lot more tendering. So yeah, we're keeping a very close eye on it. The Welsh government, as you probably know, have said they're going to follow the UK government's architecture rules. So we've had that clarity, but beyond that, and actually what's in the rules, they haven't specified yet. And from my understanding is, even once we know those rules, we'd probably have a couple of years in which to adapt. But from my area, Councillor Hopkins is here, and I briefed him on some of the pressure points and discussed it. So we're keeping a very close eye on it, I think, is the quick response. Thank you.
Yeah, what concerns me is actually saying that it's under-resourced now, you see, so, you know, it's going to add an additional problem onto the under-resourced problem now.
I think of the pressure, I think so, that my wording is probably incorrect there, Councillor Jones. It's in terms of, I guess it's the pressure that we're under now rather than the under, and it probably feels like we're under-resourced because of what we're dealing with, yeah.
Okay, just to clear up a couple of things, really, if you don't mind. Excuse me. On page 31, 3.3, feed into the People's Commissioning Group. The very last item on 3.3 with the amount. Who do you have feeding into the People's Commissioning Group? Is there anyone other than what is in that?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So I should have appended the terms of reference. Would you like me to add the terms of reference and the membership around the commissioning groups? Is that okay? Yeah.
I think it just to clarify the situation, that's all. The other thing is on 3.5, the list there, Obviously, it's a snapshot. You know, you can't produce these reports and they're very up to date the minutes. But obviously, there is a huge amount more the spend, as you rightly pointed out. There's another. I think it's children's services is another 5 million, but what I think what is important is that we understand, because it's such a large spend of money, that we realize that, you know, at any one time that those figures could alter, and I think we need to be say that very clearly so that people can understand, yes, that's a snapshot, but we must clearly say that those figures could change in days, I would suspect.
Yes. Chair, would you like me to update that table as it is, as an appendix to go with the minutes, and so it's published with that line very clear that there is subject to.
I don't want members or the public to think that that's the final figure. We have to say in social services, adult services, children's services, those figures could change overnight.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
I think that what grant funding is different. Issued differently. Again, I think that it may be a sentence in there to say that when you have grant funding from certain organisations, be it the Welsh Government, or you may have grant funding from some charitable organisation, I think you should actually say something about that as well, to clarify again, you know, for the public and for members, to say, look, if we have grant funding from, I don't know, Save the Children, or we have grant funding from the Welsh Government, they may want a specific, you know, outcome from that. But there's nothing in there to say that I can read anyway.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, and we do procure in terms of grant. We procure in exactly the same way. We just add the terms and conditions, which are. So I need to make that clear, I guess. Yeah. That's.
I think that one. Oh yeah, on item 10, this is the one, it's the joint procurement with partners. Obviously, and there's been, over the years that I can remember, the ways in which we procure stuff on the NHS and also other parts, other social services within our area. Have we finally dovetailed all these together so that they do work together, or we still got issues around that?
It's better.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a journey. I think it's better definitely than what it was 3 or 4 years ago. I think that there's perhaps even examples of where there has even been positives as a consequence of COVID. In that one solitary respect, in that it has forced people to work more collaboratively, which has been positive, but it's still a journey and there's still a way to go. And I think Jane references in the paper some of the programs that are taking place regionally with partners to make sure that we build on what has worked over the recent times, and we tie them all off, all the potential opportunities to have stronger partnership working.
Because I can remember when we had Team Around the Child based at Pentre Harwood, and the problems we had with the NHS, with the police and what have you, because the different structures and what have you. I'm glad to hear that is getting better, and it's very diplomatically put, I may add. Also, the final thing is, obviously, and this is for Chris Williams, this is more than anyone else, the increase in national insurance contributions is going to make a big difference, and it's going to be a lot of pressure on our cost structure, because obviously we have to pay more, and I wonder if at some time in the future we can come back and you can tell us what that effect has been in the social services area, because of the, as been pointed out, it's a relatively low paid occupation, which maybe that is, you know, something that has to be addressed. But the impact of the national insurance contribution, if we could have some sort of idea of how much that is going to affect, because I think that effect could possibly be in many spaces catastrophic to care of some people.
Sure, I'll certainly pick that up. I'll liaise with Jane, but also across the council to get you a kind of overview of that impact. Yeah,
I know that across the council, the cost of the council itself will be over £3 million. But I'm more concerned about the effect it's going to have on our carers, on the people that we are commissioning carers from as well. And I think that's the bit that worries me, is how much, and I think it worries most people who understand the care system, how that is going to affect.
Sure.
Okay.
And, sure.
Thank you. Mark, you have the final word.
Oh, well, I just wanted to follow that. I mean, we live in very interesting times. I think it's it's a curse or whatever. What this actually will, the change in national insurance, hopefully that will mean a significant change in resources available for social care. Obviously, it'll make a change in people's pay on what you're quite rightly calling is a very low paid, underpaid service at the moment. There is a promise from Welsh Government to bring it up to the real working wage, or I forget exactly the title, but to increase the minimum pay for care workers. And I'm hoping that comes in as soon as, and I'm hoping that the effect of that will be to attract more people into the profession. But that will obviously come with a cost. And I think it's very interesting and vital that a significant proportion of this extra fundraising through tax comes to social care and not simply goes through to NHS, which has been the sort of the easy route of spending money for government for a while. The balance between social care and health needs to be rebalanced, and hopefully some of this money will direct to helping us provide better services, more services. Well, more services is what we want to the people, but it's going to mean significant changes in contracts and how we ensure that the increase in pay flows through from the commission body to their employees is another measure we're going to have to add to our monitoring of performance. But that's all in the future. Hopefully, it's a good future.
Okay, thank you. I do like your optimism, Councillor Childs. I do like it.
Just hoping, I'm hoping.
That being the case, I think if there's no more questions, can I thank Chris Williams? Can I thank Jane? Can I ask Chris and Lee and the cabinet members for being here, Louise, Mark, for being here this morning to go through this. I know it's an extremely busy, very complex and very detailed report, but that's what social services is about anyway. But thank you very much for coming along. I think we understand that it's an ongoing system. It's an ongoing program of adapting to what the circumstances are for social services, but again, thank you very much for coming along. You're more than welcome to stay to the boring bit at the end, but I should imagine even going and making a cup of tea sounds better than staying to watch to the rest of this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I ask members to go back now to the response to the Place Directive? And that is the questions that we asked and the responses. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions on this. We'll take the first one. Sustainability statement, what form does it take? Excuse me. I had my flu jab yesterday on Monday, so look out. Peter.
So I hope this isn't going to be boring, Chair. I don't think it is anyway. Maybe others do.
I don't, but
I was the source of the question in relation to sustainability statement at the last meeting, and I'm very grateful to officers in the Place Directorate for the quite detailed response that we've received in relation to that. But within my question, as is noted here, I had a particular interest in the role of the council ecologist, the planning ecologist, who clearly has a key role to play in terms of monitoring delivery of environmental commitments against the original agreement. But the issue, therefore, as I see it, and I confess to being unsure and confused about this, but I'll persist, is that it seems to me that in looking at a alternative possible people to be awarded, organisations to be awarded contracts, one needs to be satisfied that they will actually deliver. And I think delivery on the environment front, on the basis of past history, shall we say, hasn't always been good. Now, in terms, therefore, of who should be involved in actually considering with whom to place a contract, I would have thought that the ecologist is more appropriate rather than the biodiversity officer. The biodiversity officer has got a particular responsibility in relation to delivery of Section 6 and other elements within the 2016 Environment Act. But the ecologist is the guy who will follow up in terms of a development to ensure that the council's requirements under the Environment Act are actually being delivered. And I just wonder, therefore, this may sound like an incredibly pernickety point, and I apologise for that, but it seems to me that the ecologist ought to be the guy to be involved at some point in looking at a procurement contract where there is a potential environmental impact, because he's going to be the guy down the line who's going to have to monitor delivery. Now, whether that's a relevant issue for this panel, I'm tossing into the debate, but it does seem to me that we need to be satisfied that when contracts are being awarded, that they are being awarded to organisations or individuals or whatever who seriously grasp the environment issue and are serious about delivery. I'm not quite how you want to take that on board, Chair, but I think there is a serious issue there, and I would like it, therefore, I would like an explanation, I suppose, as okay, the councils and colleges have not been involved up to now. That's because for a while we didn't have one, but we've now got one. We've got a full-time ecologist, and I believe he should be involved, and therefore I'd like us to go back to the Police Directorate to ask for clarification on that point. I hope I've made myself clear, Chris. Thank you. You're muted, Chris.
I do apologise, but something's happened to the computer. I got to go onto my phone. No, I perfectly understand what you're saying, because when I seen the reply, I was a bit taken aback that ecologist we employ, and yet it doesn't ask, or they don't ask the ecologist to be part and parcel of any of the issues surrounding it. So I think that was quite interesting to read that. No, I think what we'll do is we'll ask that question again.
Okay.
I mean, it's always a possible recommendation as well at the end.
I think,
you know, when it comes to it, we note that down as something to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Follow up on. Lovely.
I hope I was reasonably clear. I'm not sure that I was.
Well, I think we understood it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I can't see the second question, though. It's gone off on my screen, but the second response, but having gone through all the other responses, the only one I was a bit concerned about is that there wasn't any very clear idea of what when we asked for some examples, we didn't get any examples as such.
I think we got the one that the city centre regeneration programme relates to the sustainability statement. I think that is an example of what a sustainability statement is. That's one of their big ones, obviously. That's the example we had from that.
Okay, all right. Has anybody got any other issues on that? I'm sorry, I'm having a hell of a job finding anything here. There we are. Right. Okay. Michelle, is there any? Have we got any other? Are there any other members got any questions on any of? Don't know what the hell's happening now.
Oh, it's gone. There we are.
Is that better?
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't got the noise anymore. Yeah.
I don't know what happened there. The computer went off. Okay. I don't think there's anything else. Any members got any further queries on any of those items? No.
We can always go back to them anyway. Any of these things when we look at your findings report as well, when we pull everything together. So.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything else? Sorry, Mary.
Thanks, Chris. I couldn't make my button work. I wasn't at the last meeting, and I've seen from the notes that I neglected to give my apologies, so I'm really sorry about that. I think that's probably an email that never left my outbox. I was away. But yeah, it's good to read the notes. The thing that I'm interested in is the localism aspect and trying to support local procurement. And what we've got in the response to the question is that, you know, we're working on our process so that we're getting the balance right between probity stroke procedure and not having unnecessary barriers to some smaller contractors. And then the bullet beneath that says the leader said that the localism aspect will continue to be focused upon to ensure the monies we spend stay as local as possible. It's a key aspect of the council's procurement strategy. However, everything that we seem to be seeing about the detail of how procurement works, I'm still confused about how we're managing to alter the system to support and encourage local providers. And that's something I would appreciate us delving into a little bit more. And the WLGA paper just makes it clear that that's a very difficult thing to do. And the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act kind of asks us to do it, and yet we do keep just being told, oh, but you can't because procurement rules. So, you know, how I'm interested to know actually when the leader says we're continuing to change our procedures to try and get the balance right, how is that working? And I think we have asked for more information. I think one of our questions was how many local companies are winning procurement contracts, and I didn't see much detail about that. I think it was a bit of a sweeping answer rather than the detail that we were looking for. So I just ask that that's something that we get a bit more information about going forward, if that's okay.
That's fair enough, because yeah, I can see the point. I got this all back on now. It's based on total council spend, shows 102 million spent with organisations operating in the Swansea area. Not very clear, is it?
More info.
I must admit,
Sorry.
Christian, sorry, I actually brought that up. You know, my concerns are okay around procurement and so on. You can't show any bias as such. You know, if we were actually breaking down contracts only that local suppliers could actually get them, you're actually going against procurement rules, that it should be open really to anybody that actually, you know, shall we say, goes through the process. That's my only concern. I think it's marvellous that, you know, local companies actually win contracts, but then again, it's got to be on an even playing field at the end of the day.
Mary?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that the challenge is to put something in the rules that very transparently says that we are favouring local contractors for reasons that are allowable within the rules. I mean, otherwise, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act would never have mentioned it, and the Future Generations Commissioner would not be asking local authorities to alter their rules to try and make sure that money stays locally. So it must be possible. And I mean, in Preston, they used the Social Value Act 2012 to justify doing exactly that, to justify the whole public sector focusing any procurement requirements that they possibly could on local businesses. So that must be possible. There must be a way of doing it. And I think a key question for this inquiry is, how well are we doing that so far? And if we're not doing it as well as we possibly can, what else still needs to change? What is the ongoing issue? And when I've seen, I haven't seen much procurement up front myself, like skate park, playground stuff in my ward. When I've looked at the information, like even just a request for quotation that gets sent out to suppliers, I don't see anything in there that gives any extra weight or extra credit to companies that might offer a quote that are within the Swansea area or even within Wales. So it seems to be something, you know, it's kind of unspoken. You know, if there's a Welsh company that does send a quote and it's comparable and we're happy with it, everyone kind of quietly agrees that that's the one we'll go for, but it isn't in the paperwork. So I would have thought that it should be possible to say that we do favour local suppliers somehow. But as Jeff has said, we also keep being told that's not allowed and it's not possible and that's not keeping a level playing field. So I'm continually confused about what the mission is here. And if we're trying to move down that localism route, which Welsh Government keeps saying they want us to do, it must be possible within the overarching procurement frameworks that we do ask those questions and we're allowed to do that. So if we're not, why aren't we, and what more can we do?
I got to agree with you to some extent, Mary, because there was many years ago when we were building the bus garage, that's when we brought in Beyond Bricks and Mortar for the training and the employment of local people. Prior to that, we had a massive discussion with legal and with various other people about what we wanted to do. What we found out was there is a social, at the time when we were in the EU, there was a social chapter within the EU that allowed you to say, right, we want to encourage local employment, local training, etc. So you could add social elements within your contracts. Having looked at ours, I think there are some, but I don't necessarily think they are huge. Well, what we can do is I can ask Michelle if she can contact Preston and ask them for their procurement rules. Just email them to us.
I've actually done a bit of a research paper actually with some examples, including quite a detailed one for Preston that you'd asked for, which I've got scheduled to go to the meeting on the 10th of November, but I was hoping to send it around earlier because obviously when you get it, you're going to have to go through all the links and read all the bits and pieces because it's got the links to the websites. But there is a substantial amount of information about the Preston, and it's on a number of websites. But I've linked it to the core website. But also there's the Cardiff statement and 3 other examples of. I mean, they're obviously just different ways of doing things. So I'm not saying they're the best practice or anything like that. They're just giving you different ideas and how they're done. But I hopefully can send that to you next week once I've gone through it and made sure I've got rid of any spelling mistakes and things. So I can send it on to you to have a little look at, and then we'll schedule it for the 10th of November.
Yeah, but okay, right on. I think we can do that. Anyone else? Any other comments? No. Then can we go on? There's the project plan, which has got that item in it for the 10th of November.
I just got a little update for that, if that's all right, Chris.
Yeah, by all means.
Chris Williams has suggested that you speak to Business Wales because they are providing training to small companies to help them tender for work. So it might be a good idea to speak to them. I was thinking that because we were limited on time, that maybe we could put them in on the 10th of November as well, if they can come, obviously, or somebody can come virtually. So if you're happy with that.
What about the 20th of October? Because
you've got a public consultation then.
Yeah.
So that's going to be probably
better not to have them in the public one. Yeah. Okay. Right on.
And the other the other thing obviously is about that actual about the 20th of October. You probably saw some questions I sent round, very basic list of questions, but obviously they're just a starting point for when you actually get people here. So it'd be like a round table type of meeting. But I'll have a chat with Chris after about who to attend and that sort of thing. But we're in the process of organising that at the moment.
Okay, if that's the case, has anybody got any other further comments? If not, can I thank you very much for your attendance this morning? And it hasn't been boring, has it, Peter? But you know, anyway, thank you all very much for attending, and I'll stay on, Michelle, because you want to have a chat, do you?
Yeah, lovely.
Okay, thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Michelle.
Yeah, great. I can't see you though, but that don't matter.
Huh?
You seem to have like it's like a just got your own issues. I think Irene, are you still there?
I think there's something wrong. I think there's something wrong with the computer. I think it's.
I've got Irene up as well, but I don't know. Maybe it's just gone. It's not done that. Yeah, mine was very slow this morning. I'm just going to turn off the recording. Okay, one sec. We'll cut that bit off. Where are we?
I'm sorry, but it's some